Welcome to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt Podcast, the latest swine nutrition research digested for you. I'm your host, 𝗘𝗅𝗽𝗁𝗁, and today we have with us Dr. Jon Holt. He is a production consultant and founder of Integrated Animal Nutrition. So John, before we start, would you mind giving the audience a short introduction about yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Clayton, and thank you for having me today. I'm Jon Holt. As you mentioned, I'm right now working in a private consulting business, which I started about 4 years ago, called Integrated Animal Nutrition, where I provide technical assistance to swine, poultry, and aquaculture producers and companies in order to make their businesses work more effectively. And my background is kind of broad. I have been involved in research both in academic settings as well as the industry with a couple of feed companies. So I bring kind of both of those perspectives to the table as I help companies and also conduct research and consulting.
Gotcha. So today I kind of wanted to talk about some of work that you've done, and especially about what is considered, I guess, the forgotten nutrient, which is water. So it seems you and some of your colleagues in the past have done some studies on water and its importance in swine production. So let's start off with that. So what has some of the research shown, and what do you think is important for producers when it comes to water consumption?
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Clayton. It's really a forgotten nutrient, and I think even though we know water's there, we're kind of always thinking about our water usage. We don't do a good job of measuring it or really taking it into account when we look at our productivity. So I've always kind of paid attention to water as we conduct studies. I've been involved in around water studies almost my whole career, both academic and in the industry, because we've been involved with different water additives or those type of things for different species, or obviously with aquaculture, you're always dealing with water. So it's just something that I'm kind of always thinking about in terms of not only quantity of water, but also the quality of the water that either the animals are drinking or living in. So some of the work we've done has done work with different additives through the water as opposed to in the feed. When we talk about enzyme additives, I've been around some flavoring trials, and then also just looking at water quality and the different aspects of water quality and how that might affect performance of the pigs. And so that's not only with some of the more familiar parameters, but also took a look at even the water microbiome when we did some studies. And the nice thing about water is you're always using it, so you can always kind of measure it. So any trial that you conduct can really be a water trial if you just collect the data and get some of those parameters. So that's kind of nice. You can always make another project out of your existing projects.
So with quality, like you mentioned, because a lot of studies with water, they talk about quantity and, how much are they getting per minute, et cetera. So what do you think is important when it comes to quality, and what kind of parameters should someone be looking for?
Yeah, well, I think, we've talked before, I do think that quantity and getting the water in the pigs, especially, it can be just as important, if not more important, than the quality of the water that we collect or that we measure. But there's a lot of different parameters when it comes to nitrates, different minerals, sulfur levels, even just the iron levels is something we deal with a lot, especially in my area. Right now, we tend to see high iron levels, and so these are parameters that are commonly looked at, and we have many different ranges in the literature. So if you look at U.S. recommendations versus European recommendations on what quality water looks like, you can see some pretty big ranges in terms of what those parameters are, and unfortunately kind of inconsistent. So really, quality is important and we have to measure it, but I think the data is maybe out of date in terms of what we should be measuring and what we should look for, because there are studies, and one that I know of, just really recent work out of the University of Minnesota, and Dr. Lee Johnson and his group took what would be considered poor quality water, and then used really high quality water and separated those two water sources out, fed them to nursery pigs in a feeding trial, offered them either poor quality or high quality water, and really saw no differences in performance. And so some of these, in the iron levels, some of the mineral levels were really high. We would consider it very poor quality water that they used, and really had no impact. And so that's why I think we really need to look at these water quality parameters again to determine what, is poor quality really that poor when it comes to the actual management of the pig.
Gotcha. And then one other thing we were kind of chatting about before we started was you were looking at different flow rates within pens when you were kind of looking more at the quantity side. So what did you see with the flow rates, and how do you think that's the current state of that and the production systems are today?
Yeah, that's a really good point too. So when we look at flow rates, and it's really important anytime, especially with newly weaned pigs coming into a barn, that they always have access to water and figure out how to get their water intake right away. And so there's a lot of different strategies that can be used to get water into pigs at weaning, but it's something, in terms of flow rate, you really have to measure this. Don't take for granted that the water is always going to be there. So we were conducting a feeding trial and add on a water component. We decided to look at flow rates. I don't have all the data analyzed yet, but so I can't give concrete numbers here. But when we looked at about 48 pens of nursery pigs and measured the flow rate on those pens, every pen, and we did this for about 3 days during the start of the trial, all of the waters that we measured in all 48 pens fit into the normal range. And so right now, if you look at nursery recommendations for flow rate, it's probably between 1 to 2 cups a minute. And if you go to the metric side, that's about 250 to 500 milliliters per minute. Okay, so that 1 to 2 cups is a pretty large range. And so we found that all of our pens met that 1 to 2 cups per minute. But when we looked at feed intake data over those same amount of time, those first 3 days to 5 days, I think we're going to see some differences in feed intake, with that higher flow rate being a little bit better in feed intake for those pigs, kind of regardless of where it was in that range. So that's why I think there's a lot of recommendations out there for flow rate, but they might need to be revisited, because even within the ranges that are out there, we might see some differences in intake.
So based on kind of what you mentioned there, do you think this range of what you said is like 1 cup to 2 cups a minute of the acceptable flow rate needs to be tightened and better controlled?
Yeah, I think we could take a look, and again, it's these water studies can be tough because they're easily confounded with form of the feed. Pellets versus mash obviously makes a difference. Size of the pig even makes a difference. But I think that work is important. It's very practical work that can be applied by producers. So I do think that we should spend more time looking at flow rates and water use, water recommendations. It's not going away. And as a nutritionist, I certainly have heard a lot, especially, in the last 10 years, you always hear, well, nutrient levels have changed and nutrient recommendations change. So we update amino acid levels. We're looking at vitamin levels. But when is the last time you heard somebody say, oh, these new genetics need to have a new recommendation for water? And so I do think, we forget that nutrient, right? As we said at the start, we're updating all of our other nutrient recommendations. When's the last time we really thought about updating our water recommendations?
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all that data with us. It was a pleasure to have you on.
All right. Thank you for your time, Clayton.
And to everyone else, thank you for listening to the Swine Nutrition Black Belt podcast. Please visit us at swinenutritionblackbelt.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel so you won't miss out on the next episode. See you next week.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we are constantly on the lookout for the latest updates in swine nutrition. And if you have a swine nutrition related research trial that you would be able to share on our podcast, please send an email to nutritionblackbelt@swineit.com, and we would love to talk about your research. See you later.